Hey everyone, just here to give you a few notes about absolutism and European states. Um, just a few things that weren't in our textbook that I want to make sure that we kind of have a good foundation and understanding of is really what was politically going on in Europe. And this really sets up the stage for as we enter period 5 and the different revolutions that happen. So it's pretty important that we know some of these things. First of all, some basic stuff when we're looking at the word absolutism and what it is. And as in there right away, you kind of see the word absolute in there. And so an absolute monarch is basically a king or queen where basically all the power rests with that king or queen. There's really no limit to their power. And as we were looking at documents just the other day, you saw this as some different, both James and some other people basically were like, we're the head of the state, we're number one, we can do whatever we want, and we're above the law in different ways. So an absolute monarch is basically anyone that believes that they have absolute power. And we see that this was going to be bigger than in the past. And they're going to demand more loyalty than other kings in the past had done. Also, combined with this is something called divine right. And so people basically believe that God created the monarchy to be God's representative on earth. So you start having kings that not only believe that they should have absolute power, but in addition to that, that God has given them this kind of job and this task. And so kings became basically the people that could make laws and enforce them. They were the number one person, and they had absolute power. So this is what's going to start happening in Europe. And so we're going to look at just a few different countries. The first one that we're going to look at is Spain. And we're going to look at the Spanish monarchy and kind of how this happened for them and just kind of piece together some of the lineage. Now, we've talked about this before, so I'm going to kind of zoom right by it, but we know that the unification of Castile and Aragon, these two different areas with the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella, and they were known as the Catholic monarchs. They had kind of driven out different Muslims that were in Granada and then unified basically all together. One of the big things that you probably learned originally, as we said before, is that they sponsored Christopher Columbus. Now after that, the next major ruler that we want to make sure that we are aware of is Charles V. And it's kind of confusing because Charles V is going to rule both Spain and then parts of the Holy Roman Empire. And so they are going to have lands on both basically the east and west side of France. And so they have these large portions of land that they're going to govern. And so Charles V is going to be the ruler of both of them. And it gets a little confusing because he's also known as Charles I, depending if we're talking about Spain or the Holy Roman Empire. One of the major things that you may have not known is that he was the actual one that supported Magellan so that he could find that route to the Spice Islands, as we've kind of talked about before, where he left Spain, and as you can kind of see from this picture over here, left Spain, went down around South America through what we now know as the Strait of Magellan, and then came out and was in the Philippines first, which is unfortunately where he lost his life. But the crew continued and finished and was able to circumnavigate the planet. And so Magellan was sponsored once again by Charles V, just to connect those dots. Now, Charles V, because he had these two different major chunks of land, Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, which was basically like Germany and a whole bunch of other modern-day countries like Czechoslovakia and Austria, etc. And so he had this, but he didn't really have a good administrative system to maintain his control. And another big thing that happened during his reign is that there was conflict between the Protestants in Germany, and he was trying to defend the Catholic Church. So remember when he has these two chunks of land, the Holy Roman Empire, which had Germany in it, which is where, as we talked about before, Martin Luther kind of came up with his ideas and was able to basically begin to spread these ideas after he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church, starting Protestantism. And so we see that there's going to be this conflict in that this other chunk of land, namely the Holy Roman Empire, is going to be more Protestant, whereas Spain is going to be more Catholic. Now, after Charles V gives up the throne, it's going to go to Philip, which is actually his son. And something that we need to know about Philip is more than his father, he was a true absolute ruler. Kind of fit the definition that we talked before. So he had absolute rule, he demanded loyalty, and he ruled Spain from 1556 to 1598, so a period of time. And he was the one who, once again, continued to sponsor exploration. And this is when Spain began to really develop and really have the Spanish colonies that they were controlling. And they began to give enormous amounts of wealth coming from the Americas, such as Caribbean, the Mexico, and Peru. But this is where the story gets really interesting. Another thing about Philip II is that he is going to marry Queen Mary of England. And so we're going to see this somewhat of alliance, or where they start to kind of marry people because they know continue to have power. Mary did it because she wanted to have an heir as she was ruling England. But the two of them get together. They actually do not produce a child. And they're she dies in 1558. And so after this, and we'll get into a little bit more about England soon, but after the death of Mary, someone else takes over, Elizabeth, in England. And at this time, Philip, still believing he has connections to England, tries to force England to return to the Catholic Church. The church that Mary had advocated. Mary was Catholic, Philip was Catholic. Elizabeth was Protestant, and she was the new Queen of England. And so he tries to force England to return to the Catholic faith that Mary had basically helped return to England. So much so that he spends the Spanish Armada to go and attack England to try to bring them into submission to return to Catholicism. And even more strange in this whole story is really that Philip II also became King of Portugal. So during his lifetime, Philip II was King of Spain, co-monarch of England as he married Queen Mary of England, and then also became King of Portugal from 1581 to 1598. So we have a lot of things going on. We see a lot of alliances between different families, and we see that he was pretty powerful during his time. He was succeeded then by Philip III, his son, and he is going to rule Spain for some time, and he's going to bring Spain into the 30 Years' War. But overall, besides that, he was basically just known as a miserable monarch. And I mean, there he is. His choice of clothes, also miserable. Anyways, let's talk about the French. This is some good stories here about the French monarchy and some sweet pictures coming up. Just a little bit of a background here about what's going on. The king that we're kind of starting with is King Louis XIII. He reigned from 1610 to 1643. He is basically the first example of a French absolute monarch. And he basically is going to be against Calvinists, or Huguenots, in the 30-Year War. Once again, he is going to be very Catholic as a French person, and so he is going to be ruling there. Now, the chief minister to Louis XIII is Cardinal Richelieu. He is going to be a key person who's going to help in his position. You kind of see him hanging out back here. You're going to see him basically over different actions that he did, decrease the power of the nobility and increase the power of the king here. Okay, so he is going to give Louis more power and make sure that the nobles have less power. During this time of in French history too, there have been a lot of kind of revolts and other things, and they weren't really big fans of this, and so by getting rid of kind of some of the nobles' power, they were going to be able to ensure that they really had an absolute monarchy. Now, the real golden boy that we're going to talk about is Louis XIV. He is going to rule from 1643 to 1715, a whopping 72 years. So his father is going to die when he was only 4 years old. And the really interesting thing is that basically his mom will act as like regent or queen until he was 13, but he's going to start ruling France at 13 years old. Now, a few things about Louis. He is going to kind of continue on from what Cardinal Richelieu had done, and he's going to eliminate basically all the nobles from his court. And he's a little egotistical, and this is kind of his famous saying, which I cannot say in French, but basically translates to, I am the state. Not, I am the head of the state, I am the ruler of the state, I am the king of France. Nope. King Louis believes that he was, in essence, the state, the France. He was the head of that. And if you think about how interesting that would be if Barack Obama today would be like, I am the United States, which would be really weird and egotistical and not really acceptable. But that is what Louis was known for, and he was said that basically he was the state, and so much so that he, this is a good one, identified himself with Apollo, the Greek god of the sun, and became known as the Sun King. And so, once again, the whole world revolves around him. And if you were to look at this picture just for a second and look at these different things to see if you could maybe identify some things that would show that he is an absolute monarch. Maybe looking around the picture. What I also want to draw your attention to are a few things. One, he is a big fan of showing off his legs. Two, this man is wearing high heels. Just saying. And when we get back to the actual real question at hand, we see a lot of pomp and circumstance, these gowns, these royal kind of clothing that he's wearing. He kind of has his scepter, if you will, the sweet hair. He looks absolute. He's very powerful, and he would pose for these sweet pictures. So Louis XIV, overall, supposedly handsome. I may disagree. Athletic, outdoorsy. He was very self-centered, though, and had a very high opinion of himself, as we call him the Sun King. And he believes he is the state. But basically, he wanted to lavish and outshine other powers, such as other countries nearby, such as England and Spain being the major competitors during this period. So he wanted to do things to draw more attention to himself, and he focused a lot on infrastructure. And he basically used the wealth and the things that he had done to glorify himself and constructed what we now know as Versailles, or the Palace of Versailles. It took a long time to build. It's very elaborate, lots of gardens. The actual front is this way. If you would come in, then we actually have the palace here. And then as you kind of can walk through, they have all these different gardens and fountains around there. So lots of stories that we can go into for another time. This is us at Versailles, just a little picture inside. You guys, there's the House of Mirrors, or Hall of Mirrors. There's some other places where you can go boating, if you guys can see where this is. The palace is way up here. It's really, really cool. Lots of walking. Gorgeous. Very well kept. I mean, look at this. This is pretty awesome here. I was blending in. Very camouflaged. Otherwise, it was just gorgeous. It was really cool to see. I recommend it if you ever travel. It's about 11 miles outside of the city of Paris, and the reason that he built it there, Louis wanted to make sure that since there was sometimes a lot of stuff going on in the city, different revolts and people kind of rising up, he wanted to be away from the city, and so he built Versailles outside of that, and so this is his palace, and it's pretty elaborate, and even if you think of the technology to have these fountains back then, it's kind of a big deal, so it was very cool to see. Highly recommend it. Some positive impacts of Louis. His economic advisors used overseas colonies to generate new wealth for France. They encouraged manufacturing. They built a powerful army. On the downside, he kind of got France involved in some expensive wars. He incurred a lot of debt, even though he brought in money. He spent, this is crazy, but if Versailles, the palace, if you were to pay it in today's terms, would have cost $2.5 billion, which is crazy. And so he had a very high view of himself and spent a lot of money on that. The last one that we really want to talk about is England. And England is also equally as interesting, especially when we're looking at someone known as Henry VIII. And I'm going to attach another video because that's just kind of fun about him. But he's going to be the ruler of England. And if I were to say one thing, we could say that this man was a ladies' man. He was struggling to find a wife that could give him basically a male baby. And so his first wife was Catherine. They had a baby girl only. Her name was Mary, who will later become Queen Mary. But he wanted to divorce Catherine because basically she did not give him a boy. And so this causes a big outrage because at this time he was Catholic, and you can't just do that. It is kind of opposed, something that they don't really support. And so, in essence, he decides to form his own church, basically. And so he doesn't have to listen to the Catholic Church. So he divorces wife number one. As we are looking further, Anne Boleyn was the second wife of Henry VIII, who also had a lady baby known as Elizabeth. Henry basically got rid of her. She was actually executed in 1536. And then he took on another wife, which is Jane Seymour. And lucky for Jane that she gave birth to his son, Edward. Now Seymour, unlucky for her though, dies a few days later because of complications with childbirth. So Edward, we have a son, Henry VIII, can stop killing his wives. Now, Edward will eventually take over for Henry VIII. The really interesting thing about him, though, is that he is going to be very young. He will also continue after the break from the Catholic Church, and now we have the Church of England. Henry will basically be no longer king, and Edward will take over, and Edward will continue firmly establishing this Protestant church, the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church. And so he has services in English, not in Latin, kind of like we've said before with Martin Luther, so that it's in the vernacular language. He believed that priests could marry, but he dies at 15, and you may be thinking, he did all of this, basically, as a teenager. So crazy, but absolutely true. Now, when he dies, there are no more males to take over succession. So Mary then, one of Henry VIII's daughters, will then take over. Mary is going to basically marry Philip of Spain, which we talked about before. And this was kind of a goal for her to produce an heir, and also it's beneficial to Philip as he's now co-monarch of both Spain and England. And she does something that's very different. She goes against her father and against her brother, and she's going to restore Catholicism in England. So they're going to turn back to the Catholic faith and turn away from the Anglican faith or the Church of England. So much so that she kind of got dubbed Bloody Mary because she had over 300 Protestants killed for heresy, false teachings, things that were incorrect. And so much so that she burned them at the stake. So she was kind of a not nice lady overall. Now, because Mary doesn't have an heir, when she gives up the throne, Henry VIII had laid out kind of a succession plan, and then it went to Elizabeth once again because there were no males. Elizabeth is going to be Queen of England from 1558 all the way to 1603. So once again, her dad was Henry VIII, her mom was Anne Boleyn, and she was known, she never was married, she was known as the Virgin Queen, and there were once again no heirs to the throne for her. And so she is going to reestablish the English Protestant Church, or the Church of England. She was successful against the Spanish Armada when Philip sent them in to try to keep them from coming back to being a Protestant nation. And so she is going to be very famous in history. She's going to bring in the Elizabethan era, where drama is going to flourish in England, especially this is a time of Shakespeare and his plays. She's a very big deal. You can go watch movies about her. Recommend it. She also supports exploration by Sir Francis Drake, as you can see that he also will circumnavigate the world. But at the end of the day, she also will die, and there is no one left in the family, and so they're going to begin a new royal family. It's going to be a Scottish family, and actually they are cousins, but it's going to be very different. Now, James the First is going to then rule over, as he is Scottish, he's going to rule over England, Scotland, and Ireland, so he's going to be the King of Great Britain, and he is going to be, as we see, unlike Elizabeth, even though there is still a lot of kind of focus on her being the queen, very similar to an absolute ruler, but she was very well liked compared to James the First, who once again is going to be an absolute ruler. You got to kind of fall in line with what he has to say. And he is going to do something that, once again, there's a lot of flip-flopping going on in England, but he's going to promote the Catholic Church. And because of this, many people are going to start to flee to the Americas because of that. And so just something important to kind of know about him. And then once again, he's going to be followed up by his son, Charles the First, even more of an absolute ruler. He's going to have conflict with the Parliament of England, because remember back in the day, they had the Magna Carta and said the king always answers. He's not above the law. But in this situation, Charles believed he was, and so there are many times where he ruled and basically dismissed the Parliament at different times, where he just actually was an absolute ruler and there was nobody to check his power. So there was also a lot of religious conflicts, such as he married a Catholic even though he was Protestant, and the Church of England looked really Catholic. People didn't really like this. Followed up by making another connection here, that more Puritans are going to go to the Americas during his rule to find freedom to practice their beliefs. And so just kind of making those connections of why people, unlike other maritime empires, did not necessarily settle in new places. A lot of people flee from England so that they can find a place to be able to worship and follow their own religious beliefs. Charles is gonna, this isn't really great, but there's gonna break out an English civil war, and it was basically against Charles and his Cavaliers versus the Parliament, which would be mostly made up of Puritans, also known as Roundheads. Awesome names we have here. The end of the story is Charles is beheaded. Game over. But the biggest thing here, and I would kind of remember this is going to shock Europe, because this is the first time in this period of absolutism overall that a king, someone with divine right by God supposedly, is deposed, and they're going to begin to have a more limited monarchy where his power is going to be checked, which is going to line up with a lot of other kind of Enlightenment thinkers during this period, where the kings are not above the law, where there needs to be this consent of the governed, and if they're not being really ruled correctly, they could revolt. And so we see that absolutism takes a hit in England, and they say that there shouldn't be kind of an absolute ruler. And so when we're looking through these countries, you just kind of see some of the major rulers that we have here. And overall, we're going to have this period of absolutism, where kings are going to be very powerful and demand loyalty of the people. And we're starting to see really form into shape these really great European states that are still around today. And this will set the scene as we go into the next unit to understand why different groups of people revolted and revolutions began. So thanks for watching this weekend. I know it was a big weekend and a lot going on. But we will see you tomorrow, and hopefully this helped give a good overview.